Quite a lot to take in, and we are not even halfway done. I hope we are well energized for the next session. Next, we have Farhana Alarakhiya, the Chief Data Innovation Officer at Aga Khan University. Her expertise in harnessing data for societal upliftment will undoubtedly shine through, enriching our understanding and appreciation of the data revolution in East Africa. Joining her is a panel of distinguished experts who are at the forefront of data-driven transformation across diverse sectors. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Farhana and our esteemed panelists.
Good afternoon. So I have the pleasure of standing between you and lunch. So we're going to get a bit of movement in this room and some excitement because I can guarantee with 9,642% confidence, you want to be in a good mood to listen to what these trailblazers are going to be talking about. So I'd like everybody to stand. All of you stand up. I want you to shake your hand. And I want you to say data for good. Excellent, excellent. So my name is Farhana Alarakhiya, and it gives me my pleasure. You can all sit down, sorry. It gives me my pleasure to introduce this panel of trailblazers, right? We've been talking a lot about digital transformation. And, one of the things is every single action that one undertakes is captured some format digitally. However, we still suffer from what I call drip. We are data rich, but we are insight poor. And it is that insight that is required in order to make that important decision, that effective decision, that knowledgeable decision. And what I love this morning is we were talking about how we don't want to be change takers, we want to be change makers. And so the panel that we've put together are all change makers. They are making sure that we're leveraging data for good and being those change makers, but within the context of East Africa, and hopefully ensuring that we are not being accustomed to, I'm going to call it digital colonization. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel. First we have up is Jack Ngare, who is the technical director at the office of the CTO at Google. Jack has 15 years of experience across a plethora of industries, but the one thing I will do to characterize Jack is he's all about action. No minutia, all about action. Next, we have Irene Mwendwa, who is the executive director at Pollicy. At the core, Irene is an Afrofeminist. That is how I would describe her. Using her legal background, she has changed policy across multiple areas, especially when it comes to digital inclusion. Next is Edwin Wanjogu, who is a seasoned product manager. I come from a product background, so I have a strong affinity to him. But basically what it means is he builds software that delivers positive impact, leveraging data and technology. Next we have is Catherine Muraga, who is the managing director of Microsoft's African Development Center. So Catherine not only leads a team that is at the forefront of innovation and AI at Microsoft, she's focusing on areas like healthcare, agriculture, finance, and human-centric automation, but with a mission to deliver significant positive impact on lives across Africa. And last but not least, we have David Lemaiyan, who is the AI and e-government advisor at Qhala. So David considers himself to be a creator of smart tools. But what I think of David, even though he looks very young, is I think of him as the grandfather of open source. Because not only is he the co-founder of Code for Africa, but he also led and was pivotal in the development of openafrica.net. Thank you very much. And please give a warm welcome to our panel. So you guys are all ready, right? Are you ready to listen to stories about change makers, right? Okay, man, I made you stand up. I made you shake your hands. I need to hear it again. Are you ready? Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to, I don't have a mic, so I'm going to stand up here. I'm going to start with you, Jack. Oh, so I'm going to start with you, Jack.
Sure.
So I read an interview where you were quoted about the potential you see in Africa. And you said that there's a priority from an urgency perspective because opportunity doesn't wait. So what are some of the key initiatives that Google is involved in that are driving data-driven innovation in Africa? Can you give us a sense?
Sure. First of all, thanks to the Aga Khan for inviting me to this esteemed panel and event. I have read about it before. I think we had Vince Cerf, the father of internet, once attended, who works for Google, and we hold it in high regard. I do have to say, however, Farhana, I wasn't given a heads up that we're all supposed to be dressed in suits. So when I walked in, I kind of, when Catherine was laughing at me that, where's your suit? And I'm like, oh man, should I go and change? And
No.
Yeah.
We're in tech. We're
Okay.
allowed to wear
Awesome.
sneakers and all of that. So you are
Great.
just perfect.
Great. Okay, so what is Google doing in data in East Africa? So Google's mission, as you all know, is to organize the world's information into a more meaningful and universally accessible, um, platform. And all the way from different surfaces that we shore up to our customers, whether it's on YouTube for creators and content creators to be able to post their content and then get likes and figure out what's the best sort of matrix to attract the right kind of audience and to make the most impact, right down to our Google Maps that helped us all get here if you're new to this part of town, from Gmail, etc. So all these surfaces gather a lot of data, and we try as much as possible to make them universally useful. But of course, there are other, explainability aspects of it, data security, et cetera, that need to be taken, and privacy that needs to be taken into account. Specifically to East Africa, and Africa as a whole, we see this as a very long-tail market full of rich potential. And I'll give you an example. In the first time in Google's history, we're actually using things like Google Maps to determine infrastructure development in various parts of Africa. So for example, healthcare sectors using Google Maps and leveraging AI. I was working on a project in Ghana where we're able to draw polygons on buildings and determine whether there's a nearest health facility close by. And then that'll help government and other interested parties to know where to deploy this kind of infrastructure to help, the whole population. So there's a lot of things going on that is good from a perspective of harnessing this data that we already have that has been crowdsourced and using it for social amenities and for governments and as well as others interested in doing the right thing. So that is a big part of what we are doing in Africa. But at the same time, how then do we create more jobs? So how do you support more startups to leverage our resources, to leverage our cloud platforms and create the next generation of Google or the next generation of billion-dollar worth companies? And so a big part of what I'm engaged in is figuring out where those nuggets in Africa that we can support and drive more capabilities through our technology platforms and help them grow. The last thing I just want to say is also piggybacking on the previous person's discussion around sustainability on the planet. Ensuring that we have a green planet and that we leave it better than we did for our children, our children's children. A big part of what we do is to ensure that anything we do is carbon negative. And so harnessing the data across all our platforms, figuring out, for example, your Android devices, those of you in Android, whether we are actually meeting the thresholds that we need, getting that data and ensuring that, our OEMs, Samsung, Techno, et cetera, are using that data to ensure that we have this, globally sustainable infrastructure across the world. Many people may not know this, but 25% of the internet traffic in the world actually flows through our data centers and our pipes. So it's a huge challenge, and we can only do so by innovating even more. So that's what we do across. And by the way, we've deployed a huge infrastructure cable in Africa. It's called Equiano. It's now carrying almost 35% of the internet traffic in Africa. So again, those are some of the investments that we're doing to ensure that data is universally accessible and used for good.
Thank you. So it sounds like Google's made a ton of investment. I think Microsoft has also made a ton of investment, and they're making a big bet on data by developing even the African Development Center. So Catherine, what are some of the areas where Microsoft is investing? One of the areas that I thought you could touch on was more around skills and ensuring that we have the young population able and ready for this transformation.
Thank you so much. The first one is partnerships with universities. We partner with 16 universities, 14 in Kenya and 2 in Uganda. And one of the areas we've been blessed to partner with specifically is curriculum review. Of course, our mandate, we're looking at it broadly from a STEM perspective, but with regards to data, we've been able to review curricula for 2 universities from a data science perspective, both from a bachelor's and master's degree, and also engage in guest lectures, because one of the things that we have at the Africa Development Center is a rich team who have research backgrounds, so various PhD degrees in different, the world of computing. So leverage on that in terms of engaging universities, in terms of how do you, there's what is taught in school, academia, but what's happening in industry, the intersection of this. Another one that's very key and close to my heart is how do we ensure the few women who join university to take STEM-related courses actually stay till the end? Because what we've seen from data, in a class of 40, normally you have around 9 or 10. So by the time they're joining first year, by the time you're graduating, only 5 do so. So how do we, one of the things that we are doing is having community engagements and also matching university ladies with ladies from Microsoft and matching them to just give somebody that boost. You can do this. Here is a living example of somebody who went through the same process and we made it only on this other side. So and with regards to data, we have a women in data science community. We have regular cadence of regular meetups. And now the focus is how do you continually skill up in terms of machine learning and what is coming up new from an AI. And the last one, which is still work in progress, we all know from a machine learning or even to understand some of these models, how does mathematics come in? So how do we improve the mathematics score from a Kenya perspective? When you look at 2022, the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education results, KCSE, 50% of the candidates scored 50% and below. So that automatically cuts off people from even enrolling to take up STEM-related courses. So if we are truly to be the Silicon Savannah, there's something we need to do there, because ultimately we need scale. For us to really take advantage of, I heard one of the speakers say, is this innovation or revolution? For us to really take advantage, and I say this, it's Kenya, I've not looked at data from Africa, but for us to really take advantage of the current revolution, we really need to, there's a bit of room in terms of improving from an education perspective, starting from primary, high school, all the way to university.
I can comment on your mathematic example there. Whenever I go to a grocery store and I buy anything and they have to calculate the change for me, I'm like, I'll calculate it for you. Don't worry. So it is an area, and I don't think it's just an issue that you're seeing in Kenya. I think you're seeing it all over the world, because from a mathematics perspective, everybody has a smartphone and they use that calculator, and so they never learn. But I want to tag off your comment around females. So Irene, you being an Afro-feminist and ED at Pollicy, so we did a conference with Pollicy last year, and it was focused on gender equity. Looking at equity and inclusion, this is a big issue. So, how are you seeing your organization or other organizations really pushing that needle to really ensure there's equity and inclusion, even when it comes to things like femtech?
Thank you very much, Farhana, and my speakers before me. Just to pick on Microsoft and Google's work, to note at civil society and civic level, and David will speak about it, we try and convene and have events like this. And when you go into the room, look at the agenda, look at the speakers, you can count the number of women who have been invited to speak, who have been invited to showcase, demonstrate if they have products and they have to demo. So it starts from the design of the process, the design of the tech or the product, and it also looks at the composition of the people building the product or the technology. What we found is that Africa, of course, because we are majority youth and we're very skilled, we have talent, we have labor. But to the global north, we are cheap, labor. So some of the challenges come around the connotations already that have been displayed on the Internet of Things, where the internet is majority built on the English language. So even when people are learning and you're semi-literate, you're struggling to learn a new language, you're struggling to build tools using one language, which is English. Because if you're looking for engineers or some engineering languages or models, they'll almost always be in English. So this already disadvantages a community of people who have already been disadvantaged, from the data science ladies that she has spoken about, who will graduate from 40 to at least 5 women at the end of the course. When they go into the sector, engaging with men and engaging with a sector that's filled with experts who are not necessarily very available to mentor because of commitments and resources, we find that there is a very huge challenge of integration of inclusive designs. And then there is also a huge challenge of using gender data to build better products and to build better technologies. The last example I'll give is this. When you use your phones it's an example we also gave last year, and you Google an issue such as heart attack, or when you Google something like Kenya elections, when you go into the images, sorry to put Google on the spot, when you go into the images, you'll find that it's just men. So is it just men who get heart attacks? There's a challenge there that how data and information is represented continues to disadvantage the creation of new tools and the engagement of women to build better tools. Yeah, that's what I'll say for that.
I think that's a very good comment. And I remember having breakfast with Jack last year, and I said, why don't, if you use a translator for English to Swahili and you put doctor in, and it could be a female doctor, it actually translates it into male. And so there's just that connotation. Or for many of us females in the room, have you ever noticed when you try to use Alexa or Siri, right? It doesn't really recognize our voices because of the pitch. So it's just very interesting. Or for people who use taps. And when you go to put your hand in front of a tap, if you are a person of color like me, it doesn't always recognize the color. It takes time. And so these are the things in terms of bias. So with that, Edwin, I'd love to turn to you as a creator of software product. How are you ensuring, whether it be the products that you worked on at 1 Acre, that they're built for the African continent, or that you're making sure that they're inclusive and taking into consideration our different cultural needs?
Thank you, Farhana. Happy to be a part of the panel here, and we're sharing on really rich experience with what we're doing with data and products. So what we did at 1 Acre Fund, because it's a nonprofit that focuses on farmers and gives them financing in form of inputs so that they are allowed to grow the sustenance crops that they do to get the food. And then thereafter, they start to repay on how much they have consumed post-harvest. So we used a lot of data when we did a lot of manual collection, but I know there's a lot of mystique and fogginess when you talk about data insights. So I'll allow the crowd to engage with me, and let's build a small data model together so you can see how we draw very direct insights, and it's simpler than we think. So for those of you who live in Kenya or the region, we're in a rainy season right now currently, and every evening there's a lot of rain, a lot of traffic, a lot of water that is not flowing as it should be flowing, as we've seen. So if you were to go home every day and you say, okay, for every time I sneeze today, or I cough today, or I hear someone else do it amongst ourselves, we'll put 1 or 2 or 3 against the number of maybe sneeze or whatever it is. At the end of the day, when all of us take that data set together and we willingly give it to Aga Khan and say, listen, here's a data set of all the coughs and sneezes in Nairobi, what do they get out of that? They're able to tell their pharmacy in Nairobi, in this season, we're seeing a lot of coughs and sneezes. Therefore, we need to make sure we stock up more than usual on your cough syrups, on your chest congestion syrups, on all your pills and tablets. That right there is a simplicity of pulling data out of the points that you have. So we did the same thing with farmers. We went to all the farmers. We asked them, what is it that you're doing? What are you growing? What is the biggest challenge that you have? And we plotted that data and we made sure that everybody who is being served in a region, and that now is up to 8 million farmers that we are serving, has access to the inputs that they require based on the information that they have given. And we found that 60% or even 70% of all the farm-supported families are being run by women. So a lot of the families rely on these inputs, and we're not shadow guessing on what we think they need. It's based on what they've given us. And we make sure that the stock in the regions and the dukas have what it is at the exact same time.
Thank you. This brings about, often a concern. You're collecting all of this data. You're going to be in the domain of AI, and I think it brings a lot of potential, but it also brings a lot of concern. So David, I want to go and ask you the question. And I think I just heard you just came in from a conference, and I think you were asked a question, is AI going to replace everyone? And your answer very smartly was, AI will not, but a human who knows how to use AI will. And I'm going to give you an example. So my daughter is writing university exams right now, and I was talking to her last night, and she said she fed in all of the midterms into ChatGPT, along with all of the course notes, and her exam is a multiple choice exam. And so she said, ChatGPT, please generate for me 25 questions based on this content. And all she's been doing is whatever questions it's generating, it's going through it. So I personally think I'm very proud of her. I'm like, hey, you used AI very smartly, and I'm really hoping you pass this course. But how do you address these concerns when they're brought up? What is the advice that you're giving?
No, that's a great example of using AI. That's a very smart daughter, and that's what we like to encourage people, is that a lot of the technology tools that you see today, they are to enhance human experience. They're not to replace it. That is the goal. Replacing humans is not likely. I mean, we do have the situation of the dog and the operator, and the dog taking care of the operator. But how we like to address it is simple. Start learning about these AI tools. They will 10x your ability of doing anything. That's a very good example in terms of the education piece. There's also aspects of software development and product thinking. People are using it to be able to take it from being able to do, just one feature in one day and building out 3, 6, 10 features in a single day. There was a great example that I heard of this weekend. Netflix is churning out 1,000 trailers, 1,000 different types of trailers. They're not hiring 1,000 people, but they're churning out 1,000 different types of trailers that improve their services. So that's sort of the approach that I like to take with AI, or the conversation that I'm having with about AI. And what we're finding is that it's improving the kinds of jobs that are there, not necessarily automating them away, but there are some which are at risk for it.
I'm going to build on your Netflix example because I wasn't aware of this, but what Netflix also does is those distinct trailers is they will show you a trailer and a picture based on your preferences. So for example, there's a show I watch and, there's a little couple in there that I really like. So my image for that show is always that little couple. I don't know how they know that I like that. But I think that brings, if I may just stay with you, is around the ethics of AI. So we've heard from the panels this morning, the ethics of AI is very, very new. And, we within the Aga Khan University, we've built a very large repository of data. And now we have people coming out of the woodwork that want to work with us. But how do we ensure that it is not used against us, right? So where is that ethics of AI? I believe it's nascent. It's very, very early on, but I'd love to hear your feedback.
That's a great point. And I'm going to borrow from what Microsoft and Google have been doing around auditability of systems. This is where the ethics of AI, the importance is being able to be transparent around what these systems can do or should be doing. So are you being transparent around the kind of data that is being fed? And are you being transparent about the use cases? So for example, are these systems being used to make decisions in courtrooms? Now that is not ethical because the systems need to go through a fairness check. They need to go through bias checks. But if you're using it to generate, a cat meme, that's not as ethically problematic. But that's the idea. It's sort of the transparency of these systems. Are they able to be audited? Are you able to say, hey, the data that's going in, is it fair? Is it balanced or is it biased? The outputs that we are seeing, are they fair? Are they biased? Are they done well? And then how are they being used? So that is usually the principles and the questions on AI use.
Usually when it comes to data, I bucket it into 3 decisions. It's a good decision, it's a better decision, and it's a solid decision. The legal framework, it's a solid decision. You better be 9,642% confident that whatever you're using to make that decision is solid. Is it going to rain and you're looking at the weather app? You know what, who knows, My weather app always says it's not raining in Kenya, but it's always raining when I arrive. Anyway, but Jack, Catherine, do you want to comment on what David just talked about in terms of ethics of AI, auditability, transparency? Jack, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So the way we look at it is the ethics of AI in terms of explainability, transparency, as well as deterministic approaches towards the output of AI is quite important. I just want to take a step back before I just build on that. Number one, there are different kinds of AI, and it's important to make that distinction. So you have generative AI, which is the one we're largely referring to, which is where you feed it in a couple of multimodal type information, and then it spits out at the other end some answers to prompts that you've fed into it. And then there's the other type of AI, which is more, we don't speak enough about it, but things like, for example, transcription, where you put in English and it spits out in Kikuyu or in Kamba. That's also one form of AI because it was never trained by anybody, just fed it a couple of unlabeled data sets and it's spat out that. And so looking at AI from that perspective, one of the things we focus a lot on is on the generative part, because that's where IP issues come in. The things you mentioned about how fair-skinned compared to dark-skinned. One of the things I find very interesting, and I gave it as an example a month ago, is for example, if you say, give me public transport in Kenya in 2100, it'll be a matatu in Mudurwa. Those of you who are from here, Mudurwa is downtown. And it's in a marketplace that looks much like Kenya in the 60s. And that's 2100. And you say any other capital in the world, especially in the north, 2100, you'll see spaceships that flying, zooming, you probably have a Jetsons car, you have all those sort of things. But in self-introspection, and this, and I'm not talking from a Google perspective, but just as me, as an African who stays here in Africa, what do we do to drive the narrative in AI to change it? Because no one will come and change it. No one is coming to save you on AI. You have to drive the narrative yourselves. And part of the things we are engaging a lot with Qhala, I know there's industry initiatives that are happening, is including with the Aga Khan University, is how do we put a lot of our data available to be fed into these models so it tells our stories even more, So be it, maybe perhaps we should get more creatives of our own people putting in pictures of how Nairobi will look like in 2100. The model will see that and they'll start spitting out exactly that, and so forth. And so we're working on the long tail languages with Qhala. We're saying that our kids, those of you in the room, will not speak our languages because the mode of instruction, the mode of social media is moving away from our normal languages, regardless of which part of the world you're from. We are moving all towards English, pretty much. So what happens to our languages? They die off, they're at risk of dying off. So how do we preserve them? Do we transcribe them, put them on the internet? And so when people are getting answers, they can hear, learn, speak our native long tail languages, as they're called. So a lot of things have to do with us as well, feeding this information into the worldwide available data sets.
I think that's a a very astute observation in terms of, I'm going to call it the stereotypes that exist. I remember when I went to Kilifi, we're in the middle of nowhere. It takes us 2 kilometers, so about half an hour to walk from one house to another. And we wanted to buy some water. And they were like, do you have M-Pesa? I was like, we are in the middle of nowhere. And you're asking me if I have M-Pesa? No, I don't have M-Pesa. I have cash. No, only M-Pesa. And so that in terms of the movement of digital money, and if you look at, you go to Kilifi, Kaloleni Rabai, it's 5G service. You don't have that. And if you don't recall, in the United States, they didn't have the pins on their credit cards until, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So in certain things, we have leapfrogged substantially. However, you know, there's still that stereotype. Catherine, what about from a Microsoft perspective? What are the efforts that you guys are doing?
I think it's very similar to Google, but let me first, I liked the angle that Jack brought. One of the things that we are constantly asking ourselves with the Microsoft Research Africa team is, as much as we are participating in coming up with these models, what does it mean to be African? How do we make sure we preserve our social fabric? And one of the things we constantly talk about, depending on which country you go to in Africa, one of the things that is almost common is we are very big on community. So how do we make sure we don't lose that, even as we are riding this revolution? But in terms of principles, I think the two gentlemen have touched on it. You can use your favorite search engine, look for under AI for good. See what I did there? Yeah, under AI for good. We have, I think there are around 7 principles. We try and always ensure, even as we're engaging with partners from an AI perspective. Yeah.
So Irene, I want to go to you because obviously from our conference last year, in terms of gender equity, one of the things we know is that there's bias in data. We've heard tons of stories. I just gave you 2 very simple examples that work against the female gender. So, you know, what are some examples that you have seen? And then how do we combat that? And how do we ensure that we don't have that bias? Because say it's one of those decisions that's a good decision, or better, that's automated. If you already have precluded certain females, we're going to be at a disadvantage, right?
I'll touch on a recent example that we are working with under the future of work. How many of you know any youth who are able to get a job in, is it remote task? Remote task, the other one I've forgotten. But the best example is remote task, alluding to some of this bias or just faulty designs, where very many youth in Kenya and in Africa who are able to hop on Upwork, remote task, and all these gig economy opportunities. Many youth in Kenya who are taking up gigs were being paid, I keep forgetting the figure, per hour, whereas their counterparts from other regions got double, triple that. Then the Kenya youth were saying, you know what, no one will ever come to save me, just as Jack has said. So let me see how I can also get what my counterparts are getting. They used VPNs, and we were taught about the use of VPNs, but they were able to use VPNs to register their machines or their working tools as being based in other markets where they're able to attract a higher income. So what I'll not name the company, but one of the companies realized, oh, we are paying African youth more. No, we have to go back and re-strategize. So they closed operations, or rather they've held off their operations to ensure that they come back and see how they can again squeeze all the labor as they can from the African youth. And in this case, I'm saying African because when they finish from a jurisdiction or a market such as Kenya, they hop on to other markets where, you know, it's willing buyer, willing seller, unfortunately. So that's a very distinct example of some of these algorithmic biases that continue to really perpetuate harms and the digital divide that we are really working against. If you also know, there's example of the content moderators who also worked heavily to, you know, to moderate some of the content we are seeing around the Kenyan and other elections coming up in this election year. What has been happening is that there's been numerous opportunities, but their working conditions, unfortunately, have not been improved, even when some of these platforms have been taken to court to improve some of their working conditions. Whereas some of these content moderator companies or BPOs situated in other jurisdictions and markets have better working conditions. Again, another example as to how the divide is continuing to be entrenched. I'm sorry, I'm coming off very negative. I'm a tech activist. I have to paint the picture as it is. Thank you.
No, but it's not a perception, it's a reality, right? We might think that that's happening, but it is actually happening, and it's at a disadvantage. And I love what Jack and Catherine have said. It's up to us to change that narrative. So it's about changing that narrative, ensuring, for example, we at Aga Khan University want to make sure that when it comes to population health, drug development, take into consideration our genetics, our backgrounds, our cultural norms. We believe in community. So we have communities to support us, which might be better to release somebody from the hospital earlier because they have a community to support them, versus if it's an elder person, they might not thrive being in a hospital room all by themselves. So it's about taking all of those into consideration. Edwin, so, you do a lot of work in terms of the product development, but I'm sure you've got quite a few success stories where you're not seeing this hopefully bias, you're seeing successful outcomes. Can you share a couple with us?
Yeah, absolutely, Farhana. So one that comes to mind is we work in the central region, the mountain region. And what we did is we took the data that we had. This is as 1 acre fund. We took the data that we had and the farmers that would come to the buying centers. And we realized that these farmers are bringing in particular produce that we're not ready to consume. So how did we come to this conclusion? We looked at all the forms they filled. At the time, it was very manual, very hectic, a big team of data entry clerks, as you can imagine. We looked at all the produce that was being brought to the buying center. We looked at what it is that is being offered and what it is largely grown in the region. And we found out that maybe 75% of the Sagana Kirinyaga region were growing macadamia. So when you have the macadamia seed, or call it nut if you'd want, and you're not able to sell it, really the only market you have is you go to your open air market and try to pawn it as fast as you can. So what we decided to do is to set up a macadamia processing factory in the region. This is purely out of the data that we got. And we set up a factory that is doing processing not only of the large scale farmers, but also the small scale farmers who have about 1/8 or 1/4 of an acre. And they can come and they can sell their macadamias real time, and you go back home with your cash in hand. So what that factory did in that region, Farhana, is that we employed over 400 local staff there. We set up about 3 technical schools in the region. We had the road developed from Maram to Tamak that was accessing not only the buying centers, but all the way to the factory, all the way down to the lowest part of the community where they grow the macadamia. And we start to see real impact by looking at the data from a different angle. And we appreciated that because now we see the living standards of the community growing. And we see now they're more capable, they're able to take their children to school, and they're more comfortable even taking weekends off and deciding, you know what, let me find some time. But on the other angle, like we've had these people talking about AI, what we also like to look at is, let's not forget that the quality of output we get is determined with the quality of input that we put in, right? You've heard the famous phrase, garbage in, garbage out. So what we're really pushing is we make sure that data is clean, it's validated, so you run your statistical models, and it's also allowed to be used to train a model. So for example, when GPT was really being commercialized, a lot of scientists and researchers went up in arms because the data was being used without their permission. And they're saying, why did you take my research and you're using it to train a model and I didn't okay it? And that also speaks to what she was talking about, making sure that our Afrocentricity is maintained. Are we taking data from researchers who came from abroad, did data, and then went back and pushed it into the model? Or are we looking at researchers who are locally based and they understand the nuances of the culture and they feed that into the report that is now training the model? And out of that, we get a more appropriate response from these models. And the AI now becomes more of a real augmenter to the services that we offer to the low income people and also to the high commercial industries based on real African data. So last thought here is, Farhana, is I know the biggest thing that we're tackling, and I like what the CS was saying earlier today, is they're putting out a lot of systems to make sure that the data privacy and data actualization and approval of IP is correct. If you'll allow me, Farhana, let me engage the audience for a minute. When we hear about data privacy, we are always thinking, oh, it's just about who has my name, who has my ID number, what can they access, how quick can they access it? But let me bring it down to our level today. So if you'll allow me, I think you've been sitting next to your neighbor for about 1.5 hours, so you're kind of nice. So please say hi to your neighbor, right or left. So take out your phones, if you may, please. Take out your phone, your best phone. I know you may have two phones. One is the functional and one is a transactional. So take whichever phone you have. I want you to lock the screen. Lock, and you can't access. If you use Face ID, make sure your face is away from the sensors. So I want you to give that phone to the neighbor. The immediate feeling that you're feeling now, you may be shaking a bit, but I locked the phone. Therefore, my neighbor cannot access anything in the phone, correct? Now, let's give back the phone back to the owner. I'm sure we can see where this is going. I want you to unlock your phone. Is it unlocked? Please give that phone to your neighbor. You see, I see transactions have reduced.
Yeah.
Some of you, your heart has collapsed a bit and you're feeling a little bit shaky. For those who've received the unlocked phones, start swiping and just see what apps you see. The dynamics start to change.
It's so true. So, I have a daughter who's a Gen Z, and she's like, oh, mommy, we play this game. We play something called photo roulette. And so what you do is you put all your phones in the middle and there's a game, and then a picture comes up and it's like, whose phone did this come from in the group that's around? I'm like, so you're telling me that there's something in the cloud that has access to all your photos on your phone? Yeah. So that thing about like just giving away data, it's such within Gen Z, they think that it's fine. And the data privacy and governance is a very important thing. We're running out of time. However, I want to give you guys all the last word. So I'm going to accelerate, not 20 years, not 10 years. Let's just go 5 years. We have a very young population on the African continent, so much potential, so much history, so much community, so much culture. We have the potential to leapfrog. What is the one thing that is going to allow us to leapfrog the global north when it comes to using data for good? I'll start with you, Catherine. What's the one thing?
This is a disadvantage of going fast. What is the one thing we need to do to accelerate?
To accelerate and leapfrog high-income countries or the global north by leveraging data and using it for good versus just for profitability.
I see. I think it first of all, it begins with us. And when I say us, it's us, the adults in the room. Us, the adults in these corporates or organizations, us, the adults who have access to this knowledge, have awareness to some of the things Irene was showcasing. Are we creating awareness? I like the stories you're giving about your daughter. Are we creating awareness what is our point of influence, even from a government perspective, from schools, civil space, as she was talking about? I think for me, it's that awareness, and also number two, how do we make sure we don't lose what it means to be an African?
I agree. Yeah. So awareness and ensuring that you retain. Edwin, one word, one sentence.
I think if government can centralize our data and it becomes a single data-rich point of information that can be shared across all industries, that will leapfrog us to the next generation.
So centralization, Irene?
I think if we give the youth a chance, an opportunity to engage in our traditional ways of working,
Yeah.
because Africa is still catching up,
Yeah.
then we'll see a lot of dynamic improvements in, of course, digital transformation.
So youth and Gen Z. Jack?
Moral of the story of that swapping of phones is that everyone's on Android, which is awesome. Anyway, I'd say I think a big part of what I'll say for us to leapfrog in 20 seconds is loosening of IP that we import. I think those of us who went and studied and were in university, like myself, and I'm sure a lot of you here, couldn't afford the expensive textbooks. So what we used to do, we used to photocopy them, we used to read them, we used to borrow them, share them. And the same thing is happening with technology. We need to think about what our strategy is to enable everybody to get these large language models, to fine tune them, to custom them, and to build on them. We don't necessarily just have to import EU type regulations here that will just stifle us. So let's think through it, and that'll help us, do better in the coming years.
I think your comment on making it relevant for the content of Africa versus just adapting, point on. Last word, David.
Last word, I'm going to say partnerships. They're the saving grace of poor people, but specifically, they are our strength as Africans. We are community driven. We are very much people who want to work together and just go together because we can go further. So partnerships, partnerships, partnerships.
Thank you, thank you. So I didn't renege on my promise. That was a very captivating panel. So thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause. I think the last comment, hold on.